Eastern Michigan, Texas State. We got one program in Eastern Michigan that lost 73% of their production on offense last year. We have the other program in Texas State who has J.G. Kinney back for another year, which is a surprise to some people because he has had 2 out of the 3 winning seasons at that school since going to the FBS. He's been great. He's a young coach. He's going to be a coach, in my opinion, that you might want to keep an eye on for future jobs, but he's back at Texas State. He will have to be looking at a different quarterback this year, but that's not something that is unusual, especially when it comes to the other team as well, because Eastern Michigan, like I said at the beginning of this introduction, they lost 73% of their production last year on offense. And it starts out with the quarterback position. They're going to have a new starting quarterback this year. They have Noah Kama, the former Michigan State quarterback who went to Coastal Carolina. He's back in the state of Michigan. They have Cameron Edge as well, which he has some experience at Maryland. I know that he played a little bit of there. Now, Noah Kim overall has more experience. Now, like I said, Cameron Edge does have some experience, but they're also looking to see who's going to win this starting job. And when you're in a position that both of these quarterbacks are in, you're really looking for guys that are really going to be key pieces to this offense. And I think there's a few guys here that's going to be really helpful. They have Terry Lockett, who was a third-team All-MAC last year. He's going to be really helpful for whoever's going to be a starting quarterback. Dante McMillan is going to be kind of really the go-to back this year. Now, they should really have some pressure off of the starting quarterback there because he's going to be part of the passing game. They did lose a lot of their main running backs from last year, and they do have a more experienced offensive line, which should help them. They have 79 career starts there. But again, when you lose so much starting production at the offensive side of the ball, it's going to be really, really difficult for them to obviously get things going. But this isn't something that is super uncommon for Eastern Michigan as well, because this is something that's happened to them in the past in 2023. And they were able to obviously go to a bowl game that year. Now they're coming off of a bowl-less year, which is the first time in 3 years that they missed a bowl, but this offense and defense is going to look completely different for Eastern Michigan. But on the opposite side of the ball, what kind of defense is Eastern Michigan going to go up against? This is a defense for Texas State that, this is simple, but like when they were good last year, when they were making tackles, they were really, really good. Now, obviously, when they weren't making tackles were missed, it was a struggle. And that was really the biggest key for this team, and going to really be the biggest key for this defense for Texas State is stopping the run. Can they stop what Eastern Michigan is going to do? Can they stop a Dante McMillan? Can they stop this offensive line that is more experienced? If they can, then I think that's really going to help. And they're bringing back a couple of key pieces on this defensive line. They're bringing back their top pass rusher in Khalil Anderson from last year. They have Joe Lawson, Landy coming back as well. You look at the secondary for Texas State, they do have some key pieces back there. That Ryan Nolan, who was their second leading tackler last year. Now they did have to replace a lot of the secondary with transfers. Linebackers were filled with transfers as well. So there's definitely a lot of new key pieces on this Texas State defense. But it's really going to come down to, can Eastern Michigan run the ball? If they can't, it's going to be a really, really key for Terry Lockett Jr. to be involved. And can some of these other transfers, especially at the wide receiver position, help out the starting quarterback? It's going to be probably, if I would have to guess, Noah Kim, but absolutely could be Cameron Edge there. But this offense is going to look new, and it's going to be really interesting to see how they perform. Now let's look on the other side of the ball. Again, they're continuing to replace a ton of production at Eastern Michigan. They have to replace the top 10 tacklers from last year. That's crazy. Like, I know the transfer portal is a thing. I know that graduation's a thing. But there's just so much that they have to return. And there's just so many questions, marks about this team. That's why this game is a 14-point spread for Texas State. I do think JG Kenny is going to be a big reason why, because of his production as the head coach there. But outside of having to replace the top 10 tacklers, secondary seems like it's going to be the best part of this defense. They do have Joshua Scott. It's going to be a guy to watch. If they can stay healthy at the linebacker position, that's definitely going to help. That's a little bit of experience that they have with this defense. But the really biggest concern about this team overall is that this defense is probably going to have to help out its offense. And when you have a defense that wasn't great last year, a defense that is replacing a top 10 tacklers on a team, when you have really the secondary as a primary, basically best part of this defense, it's really going to have to line up well with what Texas State does overall. And I do think it lines up a little bit well, obviously, because they're going to have different options at quarterback. And it really seems like for Texas State, they're not really going to know kind of who the quarterback is going to be for at least the first couple of weeks. Now, they do have a new offensive coordinator, so I think that's going to really play a little bit of a factor in this. Now, they do still have some weapons on this team, like Carson Dawn. He's basically a weapon from the outside. He's going to be an issue. Now, like I said, Eastern, their main strength is their secondary. So if the secondary can survive, it's going to be, again, basically down to what is the offensive line, what is the defensive line going to do? And this offensive line for Texas State should be solid. Now, it's not the best offensive line in the world, but should be solid. So it's going to be a good test for both of these teams. And while I do think overall, if you look at Texas State, the defense will be probably the better out of the two just because there is that experience there. The offense is going to need to continue to keep scoring. And I think because of that, there is a real possibility that maybe Eastern can stay in this game, that they can make it competitive. But I think it's going to fully rely on a guy like Noah Cameron Edge to continue to elevate their game, to rely on that experienced offensive line, and to get the ball to the really experienced guys, to get the ball to the guys that are going to be their key pieces, which is Terry Lockett with Dante McMillan. If they can get those guys involved, if they can use McMillan in the passing game, I think that's going to make things a little bit easier on this Eastern Michigan team. But it's just really hard looking at just the question marks that this Eastern Michigan team has overall on offense, on defense. It's really hard for me to pick them to win this game. And I also think just because of kind of their coach, just because of like the talent with a guy on the outside like Chris Dawn, I think that's going to be a little bit too difficult to overcome. So I do have Texas State winning this game. I do think it'll be a little bit closer than 14 points. I do think that Eastern does get things going. I think the coaching staff at Eastern has been good, especially for the MAC level. But I think Texas State overall just has a little bit too much when it comes to the offensive side of the ball with Chris Dawn. And then you also have the defensive side of the ball with a Ryan Nolan secondary. And then with a Khalil Anderson, I think can maybe cause some issues for Eastern Michigan as a whole. But it's going to be really interesting to watch. I'm definitely going to be tuning into that score to see exactly what happens. And then after that game, I did a preview, so I'm absolutely going to do a recap. So if you enjoyed this conversation about Eastern Michigan, definitely going to talk more about this game. We're obviously going to learn more about Eastern Michigan as the year goes on. Can they make it back to a bowl game? That's a real question. I think they start 0-1 on their way to hopefully making a bowl game appearance again. But yeah, it's going to be interesting. I'll do a recap. Hopefully you enjoy this episode, and make sure you tune in to the other previews.